He was the president who rose from the chaos of the Civil War, a Union general turned statesman who vowed to heal a fractured nation. Rutherford B. Hayes, the 19th President of the United States, entered the White House through one of the most disputed elections in American history. To millions, he symbolized reconciliation, integrity, and the final chapter of Reconstruction. But behind the political battles and national healing stood a man whose truest devotion belonged not to the Oval Office, but to his family. Hayes and his beloved wife, Lucy Webb Hayes, known to the country as the First Lady of Temperance, raised 8 children, each shaped by a household steeped in discipline, moral conviction, and the chaos of post-war America. Their lives were touched by privilege, but also by tragedy, public scrutiny, and the heavy expectations that came with being the children of a wartime hero who became president. Some of the Hayes children embraced service. Some sought quiet lives beyond the nation's gaze, and others were lost too young, leaving the Hayes family marked by grief that history often overlooks. Tonight, we look beyond the presidency to uncover the intimate legacy of Rutherford B. Hayes, the father behind the commander, and the 8 children who carried his values, his sorrows, and his name into the next generation. Number 8. Scott Russell Hayes. Scott Russell Hayes, born on November 10, 1871, was the youngest of Rutherford B. Hayes's 8 children, the final child in a family marked by duty, faith, and the lingering shadows of the Civil War. But unlike his older siblings, who grew up during their father's political ascent, Scott entered the world when Hayes was already a seasoned statesman and national figure. This meant his childhood unfolded in a household more mature, more stable, and more aware of the burdens that public life placed upon a family. Yet Scott's story would be the briefest, and in many ways, the most heartbreaking of all the Hayes children. From infancy, Scott was a cheerful, affectionate boy, adored by his parents and older brothers. Rutherford B. Hayes, who had seen the worst horrors of war, found in Scott a source of joy and emotional renewal. Hayes wrote affectionately in his diary about Scott's sweetness, innocence, and ability to brighten even the darkest days. But beneath the warmth of the Hayes home lay a reality the family could not escape: the fragility of childhood in the 19th century. Shortly before Hayes entered the presidency, Scott fell gravely ill. Medical knowledge of the era was still limited, and childhood diseases often turned deadly without warning. Despite the best efforts of the family and physicians, Scott's condition deteriorated. On February 24, 1876, at just 4 years old, he passed away. His death devastated the family. Hayes, who had survived battlefields and political turmoil, wrote that losing Scott was one of the greatest blows of my life. Lucy Hayes, known for her unwavering strength and moral conviction, was shattered. The loss became a silent wound the family carried into the White House the following year. During his presidency, Hayes kept a small photograph of Scott on his desk, a reminder of the child he had lost and the fragility of the life he tried to lead with honor and compassion. Although Scott never grew into a public figure, his short life profoundly shaped Rutherford and Lucy Hayes. Some historians believe his death deepened Hayes's commitment to education, children's welfare, and moral leadership during his time in office. Among all the Hayes children, Scott Russell Hayes represents the quiet heartbreak of the presidential household. The child whose life was too short to leave a public legacy, yet long enough to leave a permanent mark on his family's heart. Number 7. George Crook Hayes. George Crook Hayes, born on September 29, 1864, entered the world during the most turbulent chapter of his father's life, the Civil War. Named after General George Crook, one of Rutherford B. Hayes's closest wartime companions, the boy carried a name filled with valor, loyalty, and battlefield brotherhood. But unlike the general he was named for, young George would not live long enough to carve out a life of service or legacy. From the beginning, George was a lively, affectionate child who captured his father's heart. Hayes, who spent much of George's infancy away at war, wrote tenderly of the longing he felt to return home to his baby son. Each furlough was a reunion marked by joy and emotional relief. George reminded Hayes of the world he was fighting to protect, a world of family, innocence, and peace. But the mid-19th century was unforgiving, especially to young children. Disease stalked every home, and even the most privileged families were vulnerable. In June 1866, shortly after his second birthday, George fell seriously ill. Despite every effort from his parents and doctors, he did not recover. At just 3 years old, he passed away. Another blow to a family already marked by sacrifice. Hayes, who had buried soldiers on battlefields, was shattered in a way war could never prepare him for. In his diary, he mourned George with a grief that pierced every page. Lucy Hayes, already a devoted and deeply emotional mother, was inconsolable. George's death became one of the quiet tragedies that shaped the Hayes household long before the presidency ever called. The loss also strengthened the bond between Rutherford B. Hayes and General George Crook, deepening a friendship already forged in war. Crook understood the weight of that namesake, and Hayes never forgot the man whose name his lost child carried. Though George Crook Hayes left no public legacy, no speeches, no career, no records of adulthood, he left something more personal and profound. He shaped his father's heart. The sorrow of losing him softened Rutherford B. Hayes, reinforcing his compassion, deepening his sense of duty, and sharpening his belief that leadership required empathy, not just authority. Among all 8 Hayes children, George is the quiet echo, the child whose brief life and early death left an imprint felt long after he was gone, shaping the father who would one day guide a wounded nation toward healing. Number 6. Manning Force Hayes. Manning Force Hayes, born on August 1, 1873, entered the world during a period of renewed peace and optimism for the Hayes family. Named in honor of General Manning Force, one of Rutherford B. Hayes's closest wartime comrades, the child carried a name steeped in military honor and friendship. But like 2 of his brothers before him, Manning's life would be heartbreakingly brief. Another reminder that even in the homes of presidents, tragedy does not discriminate. From birth, Manning was a delicate child. Lucy Hayes, a fiercely attentive mother, monitored his health constantly, sensing that he lacked the robust vitality her other children displayed. Rutherford Hayes, still carrying the emotional scars of losing their sons George and Webb decades earlier, felt a familiar anxiety each time Manning showed signs of illness. The Hayes home at Spiegel Grove was always filled with movement. Siblings studying, playing, debating, reading, while Lucy filled the rooms with religious devotion and moral discipline. Manning, though loved deeply, often remained physically fragile within the bustle of family life. As Rutherford B. Hayes prepared for the next chapter of public service and leadership, Manning became the quiet soul of the household, gentle, affectionate, and unusually sensitive for a child so young. Hayes adored him, perhaps in part because the boy reminded him of the fragility of everything he held dear. But in 1874, only a year after his birth, Manning fell seriously ill. Medical knowledge was still painfully limited. Childhood illnesses that today are treatable were often fatal. Despite the vigilance of his parents and the presence of skilled physicians, Manning's condition deteriorated quickly. On December 20th, 1874, just 16 months old, Manning Force Hayes died. It was another devastating blow to a family already marked by loss. Hayes, a man who had survived bullet wounds, commanded troops in deadly battles, and faced the horrors of war, once again confronted a grief no battlefield could prepare him for. Lucy Hayes, defined by her deep Christian faith, sought solace in prayer. But the ache of losing her 3rd child cast a long shadow over the years to come. Manning's death reinforced a truth that quietly shaped Rutherford B. Hayes's presidency, that leadership requires compassion. The suffering he and Lucy endured through their children's deaths strengthened Hayes's commitment to public welfare, education, and humane governance. These were not abstract values. They were born of personal pain. Though Manning's life lasted only months, he influenced the heart of the man who would soon guide a divided nation through its slow and fragile healing. His story is not one of public legacy, but of private impact, a reminder that even the shortest lives can shape the course of a family forever. Number 5. Fanny Hayes. Fanny Hayes, born on September 2, 1767, was the first daughter in the Hayes family after a string of sons. A child who instantly softened the household and became the emotional center of her parents' world. Rutherford and Lucy Hayes adored all their children, but Fanny occupied a unique place in their hearts. After years marked by war, political ambition, and the devastating loss of 2 young sons, her arrival brought light, music, and gentleness back into the home. From a young age, Fanny showed a bright intelligence and a warm, affectionate personality. She had her father's curiosity and her mother's deep moral grounding. While her brothers grew up wrestling, studying, and preparing for public life, Fanny grew up in a world shaped by books, music, and the emotional warmth that Lucy Hayes worked tirelessly to protect. She was exceptionally close to her mother. Lucy, known to the nation as Lemonade Lucy for her fierce temperance beliefs, instilled in Fanny a devotion to faith, education, and service. And Rutherford, often stern in public, melted completely around his daughter. His diary is filled with affectionate notes about her laughter, her singing, her gentle way of resolving conflicts between her brothers. Fanny was, without question, the peacekeeper of the Hayes clan. Her adolescence unfolded during her father's presidency. From 1877 to 1881, Fanny lived in the White House. But unlike the glamorous presidential daughters of later generations, she experienced it with Victorian restraint. Photographs of the era show her in modest dresses, often standing beside Lucy during receptions or quietly observing political chatter. She wasn't a public figure, but she was an essential part of the White House family dynamic. Visitors often remarked on her poise and kindness. She kept close relationships with her siblings, especially her younger brother, Rutherford Platt Hayes, forming the emotional core of the large and often turbulent Hayes household. After the presidency, the family returned to their estate at Spiegel Grove in Ohio, where Fanny thrived. She became an active member of local community groups, a supporter of education initiatives, and a partner to her mother in charitable work. Unlike many young women of her time, she didn't rush into marriage. Instead, she focused on family, duty, and learning. But her promising life was cut tragically short. In March 1889, at the age of just 21, Fanny Hayes contracted an illness, likely typhoid fever, that rapidly worsened. Despite her parents' desperate efforts, she died on March 26th. Her death devastated the Hayes family and the community around them. Rutherford Hayes, who had faced the deaths of 3 young sons years earlier, wrote that losing Fanny was a blow deeper than all the rest, for she had grown into a young woman of extraordinary promise. Her funeral brought hundreds of mourners, and her absence left a void that her family felt for decades. Lucy Hayes never fully recovered from the loss, and her own health spiraled in the years that followed. Fanny Hayes left no political speeches, no institutions, no headline-covered legacy. But she left something more intimate and enduring. The memory of a young woman whose kindness, grace, and gentle influence held the Hayes family together during some of their most challenging years. Among Rutherford B. Hayes's children, Fanny is the light, the daughter who embodied the warmth, tenderness, and hope of a family often shaped by loss and public scrutiny. Number 4. Webb Cook Hayes. Webb Cook Hayes, born on March 20, 1856, was the child who most visibly inherited the courage, discipline, and fierce sense of duty that defined his father, Rutherford B. Hayes. While some of his siblings sought academic or domestic paths, Webb seemed born for action. A young man shaped by the sound of Civil War stories, the presence of Union officers in the Hayes home, and the quiet heroism of a father who rarely spoke of his own battlefield sacrifices. Webb grew up during a time of national upheaval. He was still a child when his father left home to fight for the Union, and the absence of Rutherford B. Hayes during those critical years forged in Webb a deep respect for military service. He admired his father, not as a politician or future president, but as a soldier, a man who risked everything for principle. Unlike many sons of great men, Webb ran toward his father's legacy rather than away from it. He attended both Cornell University and Ohio State University, but his heart was never in campus life. He craved action, challenge, and the chance to prove himself worthy of the name he carried. When the Spanish-American War erupted in 1898, Webb seized the moment. He joined the U.S. Army as a commissioned officer and quickly distinguished himself through sheer bravery. His military career became the most decorated among the Hayes children. Webb fought in 3 major conflicts: the Spanish-American War, the Philippine-American War, and the Boxer Rebellion. His courage in the Philippines was so extraordinary that he received the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States, awarded for leading a daring charge under enemy fire. He had accomplished what few presidential heirs ever would, earning his place in history through his own merit. After his service, Webb returned to Ohio and threw himself into a monumental task: preserving the Hayes family estate, Spiegel Grove. He transformed it into a historical treasure, meticulously organizing documents, relics, and presidential archives. His work became the foundation for what would later become the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museums, the first presidential library in U.S. history. If his father had saved the Union, Webb saved its memory. He married Mary Otis, raised a family, and became a civic leader known for discipline, patriotism, and a stern but loyal character. Those who knew him described him as both proud and restless, a man who had lived through too many battles to ever feel fully at peace. Webb died on July 26, 1934, but his legacy remains one of the most enduring in the Hayes lineage. He was not a president, nor a statesman, nor a scholar. Instead, he was something rarer in presidential families: a warrior, a builder, a guardian of history. Among the Hayes children, Webb Cook Hayes stands as the embodiment of courage, the son who took his father's values onto the battlefield, and then spent the rest of his life ensuring the world remembered the man who shaped their family and their nation. Number 3. Rutherford Platt Hayes. Rutherford Platt Hayes, born on June 24, 1858, entered life as the quiet observer of the Hayes family, thoughtful, inquisitive, and deeply introspective. While his older brother Webb absorbed the fire and discipline of their father's military legacy, Rutherford Platt inherited something different: his father's mind. He was the intellectual son, the reader, the analyst, the young man who looked beyond the immediate world around him and sought to understand the deeper forces shaping society. Growing up during the Civil War meant that Rutherford Platt's early memories were shaped not by the battlefield itself, but by the emotional weight it placed on his family. He watched as neighbors prayed over newspapers, as Lucy Hayes maintained the home in her husband's absence, and as letters arrived carrying both hope and fear. These experiences forged in him a reflective nature, a desire to study the world, not fight it. He attended Michigan State University, Cornell University, and then Harvard University, developing a broad education rooted in science, agriculture, and the pressing issues of America's rapidly modernizing economy. Rutherford Platt was fascinated by emerging technologies, systems of organization, and the future of American industry, areas in which he saw the nation's greatest potential. After his father's presidency ended in 1881, Rutherford Platt continued to pursue knowledge. He spent years studying agriculture, land development, and public administration. Like his brother Webb, he shared a devotion to preserving the Hayes family legacy, but he approached it through archives, documents, and scholarship rather than military discipline. It was Rutherford Platt Hayes who played a crucial role in the creation and organization of the Hayes family archives, helping lay the groundwork that would one day become the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museums, a pioneering effort that inspired the modern presidential library system. He also worked in various civic and administrative positions, including as a librarian and educator, striving to improve the accessibility of public knowledge. His commitment to information systems made him an early advocate for professionalizing library science and record-keeping, a contribution that would quietly shape public institutions across the country. While Webb embodied action, Rutherford Platt embodied preservation. He married Lucy Hayes Brooks and raised a family grounded in education and civic responsibility. Though his life never reached the public spotlight, his influence endured in the quiet, organized structures he built. Institutions, archives, and administrative systems designed to preserve knowledge for future generations. Rutherford Platt Hayes died in 1927, leaving behind a legacy that was subtle yet profound. He was not a politician, not a soldier, not a public celebrity, but he was the son who ensured that his father's life, papers, and presidency would be remembered with accuracy and integrity. Among the Hayes children, Rutherford Platt Hayes is the thinker, the son who shaped the intellectual legacy of a president, proving that preserving history can be as powerful as making it. Number 2. James Webb Hayes, Birch. James Webb Hayes, born on January 20, 1853, was the second child of Rutherford and Lucy Hayes, a boy who came into the world at the crossroads of family devotion and national conflict. Known affectionately as Birch, he grew up before the Civil War erupted, in the brief window of peace when his father was still a young lawyer and rising political figure in Ohio. Birch's early years were filled with the warmth of a closely knit family, long before the turbulence of war and politics reshaped their lives. When the Civil War began in 1861, Birch was only 8 years old. Though too young to fully grasp the stakes of the conflict, he witnessed its effects intimately. His father's long absences on the battlefield and the emotional strain placed on Lucy left a deep impression on him, while Webb, his younger brother, grew captivated by military courage. Birch developed a sense of responsibility and practicality that would guide his adult life. Birch attended Central High School in Cleveland before enrolling at Cornell University and later Harvard College. He possessed a sharp mind and a particular talent for organization and business. Unlike Webb, who pursued military glory, or Rutherford Platt, who turned toward scholarship, Birch gravitated toward the world of commerce and manufacturing. He became a successful businessman, engaging in ventures tied to industrial growth and infrastructure, the very forces transforming post-war America. His work reflected the era's shift from frontier nation to industrial powerhouse. Birch was ambitious but measured, preferring stable enterprise over public office or military pursuits. Yet Birch's life was not defined solely by business. He was also deeply committed to his family, especially his parents. When Rutherford B. Hayes became president in 1877, Birch often acted as a steadying presence within the sprawling Hayes clan. While the younger children adapted to White House life, Birch remained rooted in discipline and responsibility, ensuring that the family's private affairs remained orderly despite national attention. Later in life, Birch married Mary Sherman and raised children of his own, continuing the Hayes tradition of education, civic duty, and quiet leadership. Though he never sought fame, he maintained close ties to Spiegel Grove, the family estate, and contributed to local development and community initiatives in Fremont, Ohio. Tragedy, however, struck early. On July 26, 1885, at just 32 years old, James Webb Birch Hayes died unexpectedly. His early death devastated the family. Rutherford and Lucy, who had already buried 3 younger children, now faced the loss of an adult son in the prime of life. A son who had shown such promise, maturity, and steadiness. Birch's legacy is subtle, but essential. He was the bridge, the child who connected the Hayes family's wartime struggles to the stability of post-war America. He embodied reliability, quiet ambition, and devotion to family values. While history often celebrates warriors and presidents, Birch reminds us that some legacies are built not through heroism or fame, but through constancy, discipline, and quiet strength. Among the Hayes children, James Webb Birch Hayes stands as the steady hand, the son who brought order to chaos, responsibility to privilege, and dignity to a family shaped by both triumph and tragedy. Number 1. Sardis Burchard Hayes. Sardis Burchard Hayes, born on July 8, 1850, was the first child of Rutherford B. Hayes and Lucy Webb Hayes. The son who arrived before the Civil War, before national fame, before the weight of public expectations settled on the Hayes family. He was named after Rutherford's beloved uncle, Sardis Burchard, the man who had served as a father figure to Rutherford after his own father died before his birth. With that name came the hope of continuity, stability, and legacy. But Sardis Burchard Hayes lived a life marked not by growth and ambition, but by fragility. From infancy, it was clear that something was wrong. Sardis was physically weak, emotionally distant, and developmentally delayed. At a time when medical knowledge was limited and childhood illnesses were often fatal, he struggled to thrive. He did not walk or speak as early as expected, and his health remained a constant worry for Lucy and Rutherford. The Hayes household, though full of devotion, could not shield Sardis from the harsh realities of 19th century childhood illness. While other children in the home grew into rambunctious play, lively conversation, and the emotional rhythms of family life, Sardis often remained still, quiet, and unusually fragile. Rutherford B. Hayes, who recorded the most intimate details of his life in meticulous journals, wrote with heartbreaking tenderness about his firstborn son. He described how Sardis never seemed to fully wake into the world, how his smiles were faint, his movements slow, his energy fleeting. Hayes spent long evenings sitting beside his crib, hoping for improvement, fearing the worst. Those fears soon became reality. In July 1851, shortly after his first birthday, Sardis Burchard Hayes died. The loss devastated Rutherford and Lucy, shaping them in ways history often overlooks. For Rutherford, it was the first great grief of his adult life, a sorrow that deepened his compassion and sharpened his understanding of human suffering long before he faced the deaths of soldiers on Civil War battlefields. For Lucy, it was a wound that never fully healed, though her powerful Christian faith helped her endure. And although Sardis lived only a single year, his name remained woven into the Hayes family forever. Rutherford honored his lost son, and the uncle for whom he was named, by giving the same middle name, Burchard, to later children. The memory of Sardis became a quiet, tender presence that shaped the emotional landscape of the Hayes household. Among the Hayes children, Sardis Burchard Hayes represents the beginning, the fragile first chapter of a family story marked by love, loss, and resilience. His short life left an imprint on the parents who would one day guide a nation, reminding them of the preciousness of every life, no matter how brief. The story of Rutherford B. Hayes and his 8 children is not the tale of a presidential dynasty defined by political ambition, but a deeply human narrative shaped by love, loss, resilience, and the relentless passage of history. Behind the calm, principled leader who helped heal a post-Civil War nation stood a father marked by private heartbreak and quiet devotion. A man whose greatest victories and deepest wounds unfolded not on the battlefield or in the White House, but within the walls of his own home. His children carried pieces of him into the world in profoundly different ways. Sardis Burchard Hayes, the fragile firstborn, taught Hayes and Lucy the depth of parental grief, a sorrow that softened them and shaped the compassion they would bring to every corner of public life. Birch Hayes, the disciplined and steady second child, became the embodiment of responsibility and quiet ambition, though his promising life ended far too soon. Rutherford Platt Hayes, the thinker and archivist, preserved the intellectual legacy of his father, ensuring that future generations understood the man behind the presidency. Webb Cook Hayes, the warrior, turned his father's values into battlefield courage, earning the Medal of Honor and dedicating his life to preserving the Hayes legacy for the nation. Fanny Hayes, the luminous daughter, brought warmth and kindness into a family marked by war and politics, a rare light extinguished too soon. Manning Force Hayes, George Crook Hayes, and Scott Russell Hayes, the three youngest sons lost in childhood, left a different kind of legacy. Their brief lives shaped the emotional foundation of a president who would guide a fractured nation with empathy, humility, and moral conviction. Together, the Hayes children reflect the full truth of 19th-century American family life. Joy interwoven with sorrow, hope shadowed by loss, and the resilience required to endure it all. For Rutherford B. Hayes, public service was shaped not only by political ideals, but by the profound tenderness and grief he carried as a father. His presidency, often remembered as a period of quiet reconstruction, was grounded in the lessons learned from holding his children close and from losing more of them than any parent should. In the end, the legacy of the Hayes family is not one of political power, but of humanity. It reminds us that behind every leader are the lives that shaped him. Behind every presidency is a family living through history's quietest and most fragile moments. And behind the name Hayes stands a story of endurance, love, tragedy, and the quiet strength that holds a nation together when nothing else can.